OnCrawl is a data platform for technical SEO. Our goal is to bring together data from different sources about the site you're working on and to help you look at it from the right angle in order to make better SEO decisions. OnCrawl helps you merge and analyze data from our SEO crawler, our log analyzer, ethical web scraping, additional imported data from any source, and native connectors for analytics solutions, Google Search Console, Majestic backlinks, and more.
Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar from TechSEO North, sponsored by OnCrawl. How the Google exploit can help SEOs. I'm Chris Lever and I'll be your host for the next 45 minutes or so. Before we dive in, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor OnCrawl. For those who aren't familiar with OnCrawl, OnCrawl is a powerful technical SEO platform that helps SEOs make data-driven decisions by combining log file analysis, site crawling, and data visualization. It's designed to help uncover technical SEO issues, optimize site performance, and improve search rankings with actionable insights. Thanks again to OnCrawl for supporting this session. Now, I know webinars can feel a bit formal, but today's session is going to be relaxed, insightful, and packed with takeaways that you can apply straight away. We've had a last-minute change as well. Begum couldn't join us today due to illness, so we're incredibly grateful to have Elna stepping in as our fourth panelist. Huge thanks for him for stepping up at such short notice. So let's introduce the panel. First up, we have Mark Williams-Cook. He's the director of Candor and founder of Also Ask. Mark will kick us off with key insights from the Google exploit. Next, we have Tory Gray, who's CEO at Gray.company, bringing our expertise in SEO strategy and implementation. Next, we have Charlie Whitworth, who's founder of Whitworth Consulting, with a strong background in data-driven SEO strategies. And finally, we have Arnout, who's a freelance technical SEO, PPC, and analytics consultant at Online Market Think, bringing deep expertise across search-driven marketing. Throughout the session, guys, feel free to drop your questions in with a chat. We have Nikki Halliwell, who's backstage as our moderator. Will be flagging the best questions for us to answer throughout the Q&A session towards the end. Okay, right, let's get stuck in. Let's get things rolling, Mark. You've had first-hand access to this data, which has sparked a lot of conversations across the SEO community. Can you walk us through the key findings of what stood out the most to you?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Pleased to be here. So I guess the thing that was most useful to me was actually getting some insight into the framework of how Google's handling certain things. So we talk a lot about ranking, obviously, and websites ranking. We use these very kind of loose terms. And I think it was back in 2019, I had read something about what Google called the Twiddler framework, which sounds like a completely made up name, but apparently it does exist. So for those that don't know, I'd read this description of this Twiddler framework, which was essentially a bunch of self-contained standalone programs that could modify search results, but they were relatively quick compared to kind of the main ranking stuff that went on. So how this relates to the data that we found. So the endpoint that we could see data coming from was, in my opinion, obviously helpful metrics that Google had calculated that they could use kind of at that post-ranking front end part of search. So while some of them were about the queries that came in, others were actual scores, for instance, for different websites. And obviously, if you have little programs running at the front end of Google, they're going to need some kind of data from all the back-end calculations Google has done. So for me, it felt like confirmation that, okay, that kind of stuff is going on. And it helped a lot of other ideas, especially around things, we'll probably talk about it later, like click-through rate, kind of just fell in place for me. In terms of what surprised me, probably two things. One, the thing I probably talked about the most because of the name that interested me was we came across something called site quality score. So I was immediately like, wow, this is super interesting. And my SEO brain went straight away like, this is going to be connected to like links or something. And then I did a whole bunch of correlation studies with third-party tool data around links, and there was just like no correlation I could find whatsoever, like not even close, right? Which led me down to researching that there is literally a patent called site quality, which sort of facepalm. Maybe I should have started there. That's quite old, but that interested me, and some details of that, like that the scores were separate for things like subdomains, particularly interested me, because I think again an oversimplicity of our understanding of how Google is scoring what they consider a website. Like a website doesn't mean a domain, for instance. And we sometimes, I think, as SEOs, use some of these words interchangeably when we say the domain or the site, for instance. I was talking to all the panelists here. I'll give them a chance to speak before we came on. There was just some really bizarre parameters and variables that I haven't spoken about yet because I haven't really found anything useful yet, and there's a lot to go on. But we were talking. There was one that's called contextual porky pig answer, which is a Boolean true or false, which I think is to do with featured snippets. I have no idea what that does, but it made me chuckle when I read it.
That's a good one.
Tory, when you first heard about these findings from Mark, what was your initial reaction? Did any of these surprise you?
It didn't surprise me as such. I think with a lot of these things, nothing like this has really happened before. But with a lot of the Google announcements and people do analyses like these, a lot of it is confirmation that you're doing the right stuff, right? And I think for me, it was certainly like there was nothing groundbreaking, but it's great to have that validation to know that you should keep doing that kind of thing. I think from a technical perspective, I don't think anything's going to change tomorrow from how I'm doing tech SEO audits, but I guess more of that confirmation that you need to invest in how Google's seeing your brand credibility, essentially, and good marketing. So, that's as important, I think, knowing that you're doing the right stuff, as sometimes these silver bullets that as SEOs we're always looking for.
Of course. And Tory, the same question to you.
I was similarly struck by the site quality score, as Mark was. That's fascinating to me, and I'm still spinning on that, frankly. I thought the subdomain, on the subdomain level, I definitely had like an internal, yep, that's what we've said all along. And it was very satisfying and annoying at the same time. The last thing I'll call out is I think it's interesting how much maybe more critical titles are than we have given them credit for, especially in a world where Google's rewriting those anyway, where I feel like a lot of us tech SEOs kind of leaned out of like, unless you're a Nike of the world and you're already on page 1 for every query ever, like how much does testing a title tag, is that a good use of your time or not? But I think that this points to that being maybe that much more critical, that we should be really, maybe there should be metrics around that, right? For like what's an estimated click-through rate of that? How interesting is that? How differentiated is your title tag from other ones on page 1, so that you do stand out? Something like that. I think there might be something actionable technically there.
I think that's always one of the really tricky things, Tory, when you're deciding how much time do we invest in pulling this lever. I'm still kind of jury's out. Like, we found this predicted click-through rate. I think it's probably to do as well with the whole thing around CTR manipulation. And if a click-through rate goes wildly outside of that kind of predicted parameter, but I think we've got the tools now with like a lot of the LLM stuff where we can speed up things like title A/B testing, because if you say this is the page contents, here's some GSC data to look at, these got good click-through rates, give me some suggestions, then it becomes absolutely worthwhile, maybe. Whereas 5 years ago, when everything like that was you had to sit there like typing it out, right? Agree with you totally. I probably would have found better things to do with the time.
Of course. Another question for you guys. So one of the standout metrics from the exploit was the site quality score, which we've mentioned. It seems to play a big part in eligibility for rich snippets. How should SEOs approach this? Is it just another metric to track, or does it change how we think about site performance? Arnout, maybe this question for you.
No, it's interesting, and also on the last point, I think for me there was a big confirmation when I saw site quality when Mark showed it to me after we had a conversation, because I actually, through my own experiments, I saw this happening, right? So Google was rolling out core updates, and the core updates, literally the SERPs would change almost every minute, especially if there was a lot of search volume, right, in big niches like CBD in the US or whatever. And I was monitoring. You could actually see that users were changing the SERP with their behavior, right? So it was a core update, and then it was just machine learning getting trained. It almost felt like that, right? And I've been seeing this since 2019 because I was doing some experiments in this, right? And then I heard about site quality and started reading after Mark pointed me out into the actual patents. And then you go, okay, I get it. So it actually states that users can build this score, right? And so for me, I think the biggest learning is, and this goes a bit broader, but is your web page actually satisfying and giving the right answer for that query, right? And in the right way. So I've seen websites where they said, well, sometimes we have a featured snippet and sometimes we don't. But when you look at it, the alternative is a lot better, either through easier rendering, right? So it's client-side versus just normal HTML. And you can see those differences. But actually, for the user, it is a lot better experience in the other one that ranks. So it just simplifies a lot of me explaining to clients what's happening. So just start with that. And I think a lot of people are too focused on metrics and they never actually look at the SERP and test it themselves. Just click through and why is it ranking? You should, I think that's it brought the human factor in way more than it used to. That's my take on it. So that's also my biggest learning and advice to any SEO.
Yep. I'd say I was struck by how much off-site factors are really such a big factor when it comes to site quality. You know, it's called the site quality patent, and certainly like click-through rate in your title tag is playing a role there, but so is user behavior and why people might choose you based on your brand, right? Because they know you and they trust you, so they're going to click you above maybe who's ever in position one. Also, you know, how frequently is your brand searched for? Yeah, I think we keep getting hit in the face in maybe a good or important way again and again about how critical brand is to SEO and how we've been undervaluing that the whole time, or like too much thinking about how much SEO impacts brand and not enough time thinking about how much brand impacts SEO, and like how do we work with colleagues on the branding side to help improve that, to make sure that, you know, I think SEOs can shrug when, you know, branded search is down, for example, because like that's not our job. We're looking to improve non-branded search.
But
like,
I also,
that's an indicator.
and I also feel like we're getting back to what we should have always done, right? We were basically taking shortcuts all along, and there were only a few companies who actually built a brand and cared about that, right? So I think for me, from my perspective as a user, I think this is a way better way, right? Because back in the days, it was just backlinks and changing page titles and H1s and let's go.
Yeah. Except branded backlinks are part of it now. Sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, one thing we've done practically off the back of that, I think we weren't doing before, was with the other marketing that's going on for the client or the company, is encouraging the CTA to be a search where it wasn't necessarily before. So, for instance, we've done some TikTok stuff where it's incredibly cheap to buy lots of views for people we know are going to be interested, and the CTA at the end is basically search, and then it's the brand name and then what that video was about. So we're connecting in search the user behavior of our brand to that thing, and we're getting more user searches, and we're training users to do that. And I think that's actually realistic of how people behave now. You know, you don't write down the web address, do you, that you hear? Like if it's, you know, on the radio, you're not like, oh, it was www dot. You just kind of go and search for roughly what you've heard. So we're like actively encouraging that now, because I agree again with what you both said. It's the gold standard of marketing, right? If people are searching for your brand rather than the thing, you've won.
Yeah.
You can also turn it around, right? And then get them to search for your most expensive product with the highest margin, and then end with your brand name. And that will get you into the autocomplete as well, which is another big benefit.
Yeah.
So there's loads of ways
Sneaky.
to leverage these kind of things. Sneaky, but fun.
Brilliant. Okay, on to the next question. The next question is around the consensus scoring. Consensus scoring, especially for your money, your life topics, where Google is clearly focusing on trusted content. But does that limit the diversity of viewpoints? How should SEOs think about creating content that aligns with or even challenges the consensus? Mark, any thoughts on how this can play out in maybe health or finance niches?
Yeah, so the reason I spoke about consensus specifically around YMYL was it is mentioned by Google in their own kind of documentation they've given us on how we fight disinformation, and they talk about the concept of the concept of consensus, right? Because Google doesn't know what is and what is not true in a way. It just takes information from the internet, and then it's like, well, lots of people say this, so it's the consensus, so it's a good chance it's true. So in YMWhale, I think it's fairly obvious in that, you know, if you're giving information that's going to harm people, if it's incorrect, it's a very safe bet to go with the consensus. And that's why we saw that flag as well around things like debunking queries, which is almost like the top end of that. So it's I'm on the edge, I'm very ill. Do I go to the hospital, or do I rub these crystals on my face or something? That's like where we're at with those queries. One thing I do want to say about this, though, is I feel some people came away from that thinking generally, oh, I need to write content that agrees with the consensus to rank, and that's not what I was trying to tell people. I'll let, I guess, someone else talk about that, because I think we're all on the same page there. But how I would use that knowledge of consensus is, if I am in a YML space, because that's the question you asked, and I write my content and my maybe competitors are ranking in the top 3 or 4, and then there's some different kind of sites after that. And it might be because Google has chosen to show some very strong on consensus answers in position, say 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it's chosen to go a little bit off-piste with something else. Maybe it's something around like finance or something where they've rated it, but it's not like super high. And I've written my content to the consensus, right? Now, what's important to realize from a strategy point of view is, I think the reaction of a lot of teams is, well, our content isn't ranking. What's wrong with our content? But what that's shown to me is there isn't necessarily anything wrong with your content. It's just that Google has 4 results for that kind of answer already. It doesn't need yours. It wants something else for like the recipe of the SERP, if you like. It wants a different viewpoint. And actually, the reason you're not ranking is there's some other metrics to do with those sites, maybe like we've spoken about, something to do with brand or links or whatever, that it's decided to pick those sites. So I think it's super important to be knowledgeable of these things, so you can accurately say, well, I think our content is on par with this. So for whatever reason, that's not the thing we need to focus on if we want to rank for this. It's actually something else. And that's something I learned looking at a lot of these parameters is there seem to be almost this tree of kind of prerequisite Boolean qualifying questions you trickle down. And sometimes people are working on something down here, but they've been disqualified further up the chain. So that's something I would take away from that. Just because your content's not ranking doesn't necessarily mean it's the content. And I think I demonstrated that a couple of days ago. I think some of you saw I reposted some content from one of my sites that was hit by the HCU on LinkedIn Pulse, and it ranked #1 in the AI overview and feature snippet in 3 days. Identical content that Google had otherwise deemed not helpful.
Charlie, do you think this could lead content to become too safe for fear of stepping out of the consensus?
Well, if it's your money or life, it should be safe, right? That's the whole point. You want it to be safe, reliable content. You want people trying to over SEO it. It should be the right answer. And obviously, as Mark's discussed, it's probably down to other factors if you're not ranking that. So if we're talking your money or life, I don't think that should really be on our mind. Is our content too safe? It should be the right answer to those questions. And if you are an authority in that space, then you're qualified to discuss it. Then you should be rewarded. Also, that will change. We all know that these SERPs are dead volatile. So just because you don't have the feature snippet or the result you want at that time, if you are a credible brand in that space, then and you're satisfied your content's good enough, you don't keep optimizing it. We all know that. So I don't think so. No, I think if it's your money or life, I think that's kind of the point. And as Mark just said, just by putting that content on LinkedIn Pulse, it didn't really matter what the content was. It was about the brand because Google likes LinkedIn, so therefore that content ranked. So if you're a credible brand in that space, I don't think that's a fear. No.
Brilliant. Okay. This next one caught a lot of us off guard. So Google has always downplayed the impact of subdomains versus subfolders, but here we are. Does this change how SEOs should approach site architecture? Now, what I mean by that, it turns out that subdomains are scored separately. Does it change how SEOs should structure the sites, or is it business as usual?
Well, for me, it's basically business as usual, because I've always said use a reverse proxy if needed to get it onto your own domain. However, it's not like I did a few experiments with it, and sometimes the results were actually it not ranking better, right? And sometimes the impact was absolutely massive. And I still remember for a large bike brand, we changed their newsroom, which had a lot of backlinks, from our subdomain through reverse proxy onto the main domain, and it just boom took off massively. But I did the same thing with another company, but the subdomain had no backlinks whatsoever, and the impact was minimal. So what I've seen is it's not like the silver bullet. It's like, no, it's not going to massively change. There are use cases, but in the current day and age with CDNs, it's so freaking easy to get a reverse proxy set up. So like, nah, I don't even like, if I see it, I'm like, nah, just do it, right? There's no, however, there's an interesting one as well. We've had issues where the main site was losing traffic all the time, and at some point our forum, which was on a subdomain, started losing as well. So we changed that subdomain into a new domain. We redirected everything. We didn't change the content. We didn't change anything. Just 301 did, and it just took straight back up. So yeah, that surprised me, but again, that's why you do experimentation, right, in SEO. And that's why
I'm so impressed you managed to get through that and not say it depends.
Well, I kind of did. Just avoided the word, right?
I was literally about to start a sentence, but it depends, and I'm not going to now.
Did anyone think before this, though, that subdomains and subfolders were just treated exactly equally?
No.
Yeah.
No
way.
Because it does depend what you're redirecting to, doesn't it? So, like, not all subdomains are equal, essentially.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Tory.
Exactly.
That's where context matters to me. I mean, I feel like some people are going to take this data and be like, oh, we just have to combine the subdomains, and they won't care about what the subdomains are about. And to me, I go back to like Google's argument about why subdomains don't matter. And I feel like on the face, what they're saying is true. Like, there's not a problem with subdomains. There is a problem when like content isn't with like content. When you're separating out, say, I mean, we as SEOs are almost always talking about the context of blog strategic content not being with the main site when we talk about subdomains. But Google's talking about, say, customer service queries, right? Those might be on a subdomain. You might be a big brand that hosts things for other brands, like say you're an HR platform. So you have a site for one of your customers. There are good and valid business reasons why your business should have subdomains, and not all of those subdomains need to be on your site. So that is it depends. It's the context of like, how related is the subject matter? How much overlap is there with the audience that you're targeting? Backlinks, to Arno's point, as well as just like quality. So I've had times when I've said, hey, let's not do the reverse proxy and move the blog over to the main site, because the blog's not a very high quality blog. This is like a very early 2000s content for the sake of content. Lots of different separate posts targeting individual keywords. Like, we need to work on the quality of this content or it's not going to benefit us. So those are kind of the main factors that it depends on for me.
A lot of people forget. Sorry, on it.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say as well, people just do the reverse proxy and think that's it. You've done the reverse proxy, why is it not working? They also don't look at, like, internal linking or site architecture. And because, at the end of the day, just because you put reverse proxy into redirects to some URLs doesn't necessarily mean Google's going to suddenly see them as super authoritative. So in terms of like the recommendation overall site structure, it's just part of the piece, isn't it? And exactly what you're redirecting to. If that blog's 80% deprecated articles that get like 2 clicks, and Google's not going to suddenly be like, oh no, but it's got reverse proxy, so we're going to rank it now. So it's just part of it, isn't it?
I always had the argument where all the subdomain blogs on hosted WordPress were on subdomains, and I was like, if it would all be treated the same, I would just start a blog there, right? Because it will always rank, which it didn't, which kind of proved the point that they were treated separately back in the days, right? So that's the argument I used to use a lot, but nowadays, but also with help queries, I see so many of these tools like Intercom, and they all run on subdomains, and I'm like, just create a guide for people to easily integrate that into the site, because why not, right? It makes tracking, it makes everything a lot easier. But hey.
Brilliant. Mark, another question for yourself. Predicted CTR plays a role in post-ranking performance. How can SEOs optimize this without overthinking it?
How can SEOs do anything without overthinking it? I think it's a good question.
Impossible.
Yeah. So, I mean, it is honestly one of those things that I would consciously say don't overthink it. More people click on site is good. If we want to like break it down, as Tory mentioned in like the site quality patent, that's looking at, it specifically says when people choose your result in the SERP, right? So this to me means you rank third and the user purposely does not click on number 1 or number 2, it clicks on you, right? Click-through rate manipulation, as I've spoken about, works, or actually we should say Google's system for determining when the intent of a search has radically changed works, I think, on the same principle as the site quality thing, which is that there is a predicted score for all of these sites. So there's a query. I know what these sites about because I've already ranked them, and therefore this is like roughly a percentage of people I click on them. If the user behavior goes out of bounds of that, then I think that's when the post-ranking stuff can kick in. When it's just like, wow, I did not see this coming. People are just clicking on this thing, and I don't know why, but I better put it top. And as we know, that tends not to stick. I saw Joy from Sterling Sky do another study recently that showed the same thing on local results once they stopped the click-through manipulation. Point out they didn't do that. It was someone else's manipulation they were looking at. It just went back to normal. But again, if you're being specifically selected in the SERP, to me, that means you're defying what should be the kind of usual click-through rate, which is then maybe a signal if that continues to happen over a long time and it has an identifiable navigable term in there, i.e. your site name, your brand. I don't want to use the term brand because I don't actually think that's quite correct for what I'm trying to describe, but like a navigable intent term, then I think that will benefit. That said, I've always encouraged us to look at CTR when we do SEO because it's an easy way to win traffic, right? Winning positions and rankings and visibility is hard work and requires lots of things to pull. If you can modify a title tag and Google deigns it worthy of being shown to users, and you change your click-through rate from 2 to 2.2%, you've significantly increased the amount of traffic you're getting. So again, I would do two things in terms of, now I know this, what do I do? As I said earlier, I would be thinking of other ways before the search, in the discovery phase of our marketing, so making people aware of our solution, our product, our service, our brand, encouraging them to do searches where essentially you've rigged the game and they're going to pick you because there's a reason to. And there's loads of ways you can do that, from even things like competitions, getting people to search for certain stuff with keywords in, with your brand in. And just down to, as I mentioned Tory earlier, there are ways now that you can cost effectively do bits of A/B testing. There are lots of great online platforms out there for SEO testing. So we can measure it, we can iterate, and it isn't a job where you have to sit over a spreadsheet for hours and hours tweaking things.
I think there's also something potentially to be said for like just differentiating amongst the results. So I'm very much with you in terms of like, you don't want clickbait. You want to be true to the content. You have to build trust with users over time so that they click your post. Tactically, I think there would also be a way to like look at the SERPs and see how similar they are structurally. So what I mean here is, sometimes I see these like A/B test announcements that like, hey, adding free to your title tag will mean your click-through rate will improve X%. Or, using a pipe instead of a dash or vice versa is really going to help you stand out. And I always just like, no, it's not about the pipe. It's not about the free. It's that, maybe it's about the free, to be clear, because people love free stuff. But if you can show visually, if there's something about your listing and your title tag that like visually catches the eye. So I heard a new one recently where everyone moved to title casing, right? And now people are moving back to sentence casing. So because everyone is doing title casing, should you do sentence casing instead, that means visually your title stands out. So I think being different, not being with the consensus, doing something like the right amount of different that calls attention to you in a positive way, that could potentially, really update your click-through rate and make a difference.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because if you've got clients that aren't on massive budgets, so for instance can't afford digital PR, which obviously helps to get their brand out there, provide their products good, it's a tough one at the moment. Working out what to do in terms of trying to enhance the SERP. Google might ignore what you're doing anyway. They might ignore your structured data. They might use a completely different title tag, or trying to get them to help to promote their brand without massive digital PR budgets. So if you can't go out and get in the press or get in the places that builds a brand, kind of what you're left with really is the SEO stuff, which then might not be honoured anyway. So I think that's a tricky bit of, depending on budgets and clients, isn't it? Is where you put that focus to try and boost that click-through rate. For some brands, it's quite an easy decision because they've got that authority. But that's the challenge I sometimes have with some of the lower budget ones is Google might ignore this anyway.
I remember when it was, I haven't tested it for a while, but when you were able to add emoticons in your structured data, in your that really stood out, right?
Yep.
And there's like, and I actually bumped into some SERPs that still have a gazillion emoticons in them, in the titles. If you search for any emoticon, you'll see emoticons everywhere.
Yep.
Right, even in page titles and things like that. But I guess a lot of this is down to, and the other thing I was thinking, like, and I haven't tested it, but people are using CTR manipulation, and it only works in certain cases. How long? Like, I'm not doing it, but there are. I've had clients in very competitive niches where people were doing it. You could actually see it happening, and there are certain times it works and certain times it doesn't work. There is a thing there, but I wouldn't recommend doing it. But again, there are niches where it happens a lot, unfortunately.
I think Tory is right on the kind of clickbaiting thing as well. And again, this is the danger of taking of overthinking things and taking individual metrics and trying to optimize for them. So if you're like, oh, we're going to optimize CTR, so we make a load of promises in the title, and then people get there and then they're immediately disappointed. I think, like Arnout said right at the beginning, what are they going to do? They're going to bounce back to the SERP. Yep. And we know from the DOJ trials, Google is looking at SERP interactions. So they're trying to measure how satisfied you are with it. So it's this balancing kind of game. I feel as like SEOs, like if you taught an SEO to bake a cake, once they worked out sugar made cakes taste sweet, they would just be like, right, we need 3 kilos of sugar in this cake, and make the most disgusting melted mess and be like, why does no one like it? So yeah, definitely about balance. And as Tory and Arnout said, try and actually deliver what you're promising.
You got to build trust. People won't pick you out.
So think that Chrome data. So I think things that happen off the browser, but in the end into the browser, also play a big role. So if you do advertising somewhere, it also generates a lot of demand. I think that's popularity. I think one thing that stood out with me in 2015 when I talked to Dawn Anderson, she basically said Google just search engine does not want to be embarrassed. So they always need to serve what people are looking for. And I think that always stood with me. So they don't want to send you to a location that under promises or like that screws you over. They don't want that because it's their trust they put in the scale, right? So I think that's a really important one as well to remember as SEO.
And that's why the big brands get their penalties lifted quickly.
Yes. Yes.
Exactly.
But it's also why certain people got manual penalties, because they
for sure.
flaunted issues before Google.
If you do a heist, you're going to get it.
Yeah. Or if you do a heist, don't post about it on Twitter or, other social platform that matters.
Exactly.
The best SEO tip we've given today.
Yeah. Yeah.
Post about it privately, not open.
Brilliant. Okay, moving on. We've got a few questions left, and then we'll get into the Q&As. Next question is around AI. So with AI increasingly generating answers for short, fat queries, how can SEOs adapt and remain relevant? That goes out to anyone.
I think a little bit goes back to brand again. So if based on the AI overviews and how much you want to influence the answer, or getting into how do you rank in an AI snippet or a featured snippet, an AI summary, there might be a difference there in terms of the brand. And how much they have trust. So for example, like you might be already featured in a featured snippet. And if you want to be in that AI overview, I think you need to have more of that brand awareness or that association for why people would trust you and go to you as the go-to. And that ties to the don't embarrass Google, but also like be the thing Google has to show. Because if they don't show you, people are surprised or confused or something is maybe wrong, whether it's an e-commerce query and they expect Amazon to come through, or if it's like a definition, right? Are you Merriam-Webster and people trust you for definitions, then you're more likely to be cited in that use case.
I think it's tricky, isn't it? I think this comes down to how solid your content strategy is and how quickly you're utilizing data. Because obviously we've sort of shown that you've got a limited shelf life for that query, for that snippet. Yeah, you could replace it with something else, but obviously, you know, I think the average time was it? I can't remember. We looked at the graph before. So obviously, you've got to stay current and relevant and keep giving most relevant answers, and the questions change as well, obviously, to the user behavior. So, yeah, I think it's not like a technical thing. That comes down to just how solid your content strategy, how quickly you're using the latest data. I think.
Mm-hmm.
I have a slightly maybe different view on this, which is that I think where we are at the moment, which is kind of AI summaries of stuff that's on the web and, you know, the retrieval augmented generation, things like Perplexity, is going to be a stepping stone very quickly and for a relatively short amount of time to having essentially the searches being done by the agents and the agents understanding the user. So rather than me saying, oh, okay, I want Nike running shoes, I can say to my phone, you know, I want to buy some running shoes. But because the phone manufacturer, whether it's Google, Apple, Microsoft, knows a bunch of stuff about me from my behavior, they might know, for instance, that I only want to buy from like ethical brands, and they already know my shoe size. Maybe they know some of my color preferences. Maybe they know my gender and my weight and stuff, and they will make a lot of decisions for me and do the research for me. So the end result, I think, is that we will still be optimizing, but we'll be optimizing for robots, not the end user, because the drudgery of the research work will be given to robots, because why would you not? And if there's one thing we've seen throughout the progression of technology, it's people take the path of least resistance. If I can get the same result with less energy, I'll do it. And I think if they understand the choices I would make, why not let them do the research? So I think actually we're going to see less traffic, but way more valuable and qualified traffic. So as Tory said, I think near the beginning, like making sure your brand clearly has a differentiator, like this is why you should buy from us, right? So yes, we make trainers, but here is why we're different. Or we sell SEO services, but here is why we are slightly different to someone else in terms of, even if it's like pricing or the size of the team or the type of people we work with. So I think that's more traditional marketing role, and I think technical SEO will actually become more important to make that information as accessible to robots as possible.
And on-site and off-site, right? Because those agents will be looking everywhere, won't they? Like your site could even be a small portion of where they're gathering all that info from.
Well, exactly, because I think Mark makes a very good point here, and we talked about it earlier. I think it's also your digital footprint. It needs to be everywhere, because if you're just saying that as a website, just the one, saying it about yourself, it's not going to work. And this is also because of the way LLMs are trained, right? Massive groups of data. So it needs to be consistent everywhere. I think this is where digital PR and like all of that plays not only digital, just PR, just telling your story everywhere, right?
It'll be interesting as well, because as far as I'm aware, the LLMs don't look at domain authority and things like that. So where this information is being, where this information about you is being, is they're getting it from, it's not going to be sorted by perceived domain authority, is it?
No. It's more co-occurrence, right?
Yeah.
Consistency.
Brand mentions.
Yeah.
So I thought years ago right? Like 10, 15 years ago, I was like, oh, technical SEO will become less important because search engines will get way better. What I didn't expect 10 or 15 years ago was the web got way more complicated, and now there's like hydration and JavaScript and content delivery networks and levels of caching and front-end JavaScript and pre-rendered stuff and SPAs and hreflang and canonical, like, and it got more complicated. And you know, the amount of sites using JavaScript, like I see more benefit now from technical SEO with clients than I did 10 years ago, because there's just more that
I
can go
agree.
wrong. So
I agree.
that's why I said I think in the future, when we're getting, you know, more automation, more robots, there just feels like to me it's going to be more stuff to go wrong quicker.
But also think about the poor the rendering of all those pages. I mean, we already know that the majority of the AI crawlers, they don't render pages, right? They take the raw HTML and they try to extract the data from it. So it's massive. So I tend to show my clients like, here's JavaScript and all scripts turned off. This is your website. And they go like, why is my menu not working? My mega menu. I'm like, well, because it isn't, right? And yeah, it's eye-opening for loads of people, but that's the way most crawlers, apart from say Google and Bing, are able to digest it. It's very simple.
Guys, I'm going to have to move us on a little here. We've already gone through 46 minutes. What I'd like to do is move us on to audience Q&A. I know Nikki has been monitoring in the background and I'm keeping an eye on if any questions coming in. So are you okay if we move on to the Q&A?
Sure.
As long as they're good questions, yeah. By that I mean not hard.
First question from Anders. Having tested Steve Tooth's GTP agent based on Mark's finding, got some nice and useful outputs. Has anyone in the panel tried it? And do you think it can be used for scale at larger websites? So Mark, was this the tool that you were showing earlier, the Streamlit app?
I don't think so. This sounds like something Steve Toth has made. And I don't know what that is, so I can't answer that question.
Me neither.
Sorry.
Maybe if you put a link in chat, I can kind of look at it while we're answering other questions and then try and answer your question as helpfully as I can, Anders.
Okay. Next question is from Doran. Anders, yes, and I have a different angle on it. It's a great question. At what point does information gain aligned with consensus degrade originality? Degrade? Am I pronouncing that correctly? Degrade originality. Yeah.
I think this is a great point, and I had a lot of thoughts around this. Like, what is the balance of consensus when it's necessary versus information gain? And I think this points to, like, I think like this panel has said, that it means that people will herd into the consensus, though I do think that will absolutely happen. I think there will be plenty of use cases where people herd to the consensus. But I also think that where this could really, really shine is brands that are willing to focus on content that differentiates, content where maybe you agree with the consensus, but you have something new and interesting and unique to add. Where can you add? So to me, those things really go hand in hand, because information gain isn't necessarily contradictory to the consensus, but like, where can you do something and then add that little magic?
I think were you going to say something, Arnout? It looked like you were
No, you go ahead.
So I originally misunderstood the concept of information gain until I read the patent, because information gain, at least in the patent, is specifically talking about that user's search session and talking about information gain within the context of the set of searches they are doing. So that, as I understand it, it's more Google trying to work out how much does this person know, and what have I already shown them, and
exactly.
what information gain is going to be given in the next set of results. So if my understanding of that is correct, then while I think the question is interesting, and I agree from a strategic point of view absolutely with everything Tory said, I don't think they're operating on the same level. I think consensus is like a global, this is a topic and this is the bell curve of consensus, whereas information gain is this pocket of this user has explored this much, because there's also other patents that try and determine a user's level of knowledge about a subject based on their query, and then that will affect ongoing searches. I can't remember the patent name. I've got a little automated podcast called the SEO Patent Podcast, which covered it about 3 weeks ago. And again, disclaimer, just because something has a patent doesn't mean it's currently used in search. But I thought it was super interesting and they overrated.
I think I want to add one more thing, because I think this is in general in the state we're currently at with generative AI, that new and novel ideas won't easily surface in those because of the way it's being trained. And I think this is kind of, say there would be a new way to do knee surgery, which is extremely like hot and happening, but it will never be visible because it's always been done in a certain other way. So I think this is a challenge that we can't solve as SEOs. This is about the engines and the LLMs and everything to figure this one out. But it's a hard nut to crack. I'm 100% sure about that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like we don't always know how Google measures things and how good they are at measuring that, and how well does that measurement scale. And I think we can make a lot of assumptions about things and what we think is working, but I don't know. It's interesting. How good will Google be at this is such a big factor of whether or not it'll stick around.
Yeah.
And we've got another question in here from Kia. How do you rectify the fact that links can outweigh content accuracy or consensus? Think how Wikipedia always ranks despite it being user-generated and often factually incorrect, given Google's fact-checking systems are quite robust.
Is that a question for Google or us? I don't want to, I'll pass this to someone else to answer. I just want to say on the Wikipedia, often factually incorrect. So there was a study on the amount of errors in Encyclopedia Britannica and Wikipedia, and they found Wikipedia had fewer factual errors than the actual published encyclopedia. So I'd say nothing is perfect, but Wikipedia does actually do a good job of getting there. But I'll pass it to someone else.
It's the same in concept of, again, your example about popping your AI content onto LinkedIn Pulse, isn't it? Because it's exactly the same rationale as to why Wikipedia would always rank, generally would rank first for it. I don't think it's links. It's probably more like perceived quality score, isn't it?
But I think the other part of Wikipedia is that it's heavily moderated versus LinkedIn not being moderated. I think that's a big thing in there as well. And the fact that Wikidata, which used to be, what was the one before Wikidata, which merged into Wikidata, whatever. Like that is a source which is basically one big internal knowledge graph, right? And I think the fact that it's being policed or moderated, I think that gives Google a certain amount of trust, more than just consensus in the web. Whether that's completely right, I don't know, but I think this is a big thing. I think they just deem that it's trustworthy, and links play a massive role in that.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. And I think it's just an interesting, very anecdotal personal take. Like I would trust Wikipedia before ChatGPT in a hot minute. Doesn't mean I wouldn't trust but verify, but
it's got everything going for it, right? Brand searches, probably hundreds of millions of links. I haven't even looked. A lot.
Yeah.
Okay, next question from Rudia. Would like to have your opinion on structured data, more or less important than before. This seems to be a bit of a trending topic at the moment around structured data. And I think there's another webinar later today talking about if structured data is relevant or not.
Schema, all the schemas, like structured data, like I feel like generally speaking, the schemas are as important, if not more important. They're certainly not less important. I don't think.
I think. I think it depends, right? I think that people, there was, sorry, Mark, but I think when you look at things like LLMs, I don't see an added value directly in training LLM models for structured data. It doesn't make sense. However, I think it would make sense in the use case that Mark gave with agents, because it's a way to verify what's actually on the page. So from that perspective, yes, but I've heard people say, hey, this is because of your LLMs and the AIs.
Do you think it'll depend how it's implemented as well? So, your old school structure schema is in a HTML, JSON LD, LLMs might not pass that in the same way. So there could be, if it's in that raw HTML, like you mentioned, it's text, right? So I don't know.
But I think for sure, if you use GTM to inject your JSON, that'd be a bit difficult. But I think
the
for the
JSON
rest,
LD scripts, they were JavaScripts, aren't they? So do you think some of the LLMs might not even bother processing that?
I think they will.
I mean, the ChatGPT model said it was trained on web content and specifically said it wasn't trained on like the full HTML of a page. It was trained on the content. So I think a lot of the code stuff it gets has been from stuff like Stack Overflow, and where, in the millions of pages of coding tutorials, and where that's why it can kind of generate structured data. But again, it's not a deterministic output, so it gets it wrong sometimes, which kind of makes it useless for that. I'm with Arnout, like maybe for RAG stuff, but like where a LLM is sitting on top of like a search index, it might have get bumped up in terms of look at these index pages because it had some kind of structured data on it. But I don't think directly for the raw LLM model, from what I understand of how they're trained and what they're doing in terms of probability, that scheme is going to have that effect of saying this is a thing and it is connected to this thing like this.
Yeah, I was thinking like, same as for entities and stuff. It's not going to be doing what Google does in that respect quite yet, is it?
Yeah. And the tech is evolving so quickly. I think it's hard to say, will it be useful in the future? Because it's just because it's used today, just because they're not rendering today doesn't mean they won't tomorrow. Do I expect that answer to change pretty quickly? I really honestly do. I think that they won't stick around very long if they're not rendering, or if they're not partnering with someone who's going to do that rendering for them. They want access to that data. That doesn't mean it's technical SEOs. We're not going to help bridge that gap and try and get things in the raw HTML. But it's moving at a mile a minute, so it's hard to say. We still like it. I think to the AI agent aspect, like that probably makes it more interesting to me in the near term, frankly. But we're always monitoring to see how this changes and being willing to kind of change our tactics accordingly.
I think it's also really interesting who was the last contributors to Schema, right? And I haven't seen anybody from OpenAI or any other making contributions. Actually, it's only been Google in the last few years. So that to me is another signal that they're not at the moment, at least.
Not leveraging it, not right now.
Is there any more questions, Nikki, or was that the last one? Brilliant. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of today's session. A massive thank you to Mark, Tory, Charlie, and Arnout for sharing their insights. And thanks to everyone that's joined us today. Some key takeaways from today include the importance of site scores, understanding how Google's consensus scoring impacts rankings, and how branding plays an even bigger role than many of us have realized. Before we go, I'd like to give a shout out to a few things. Check out Mark's newsletter at coreupdates.com. It's packed with great SEO insights. And if you're not already subscribed, Nikki's Tech SEO Tips newsletter is another fantastic resource. Our in-person Tech SEO event is on the 27th of February, and it's sold out. But don't worry, we have another one lined up for Leeds in the summer. And we've also got a Slack channel, an active LinkedIn page, and a new website launching soon. So if you could stay connected. And thanks again, everyone. Stay curious, keep testing, and we'll see you next time.
Excellent. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. Thank you.
See you later.